Hey everyone, time to read a little Are You Lonesome Tonight? The story of Lucy DeBarbin and Elvis Presley. So we're going to get started on the actual book. So we've read the preface and the acknowledgement and the introduction, and now we're going to get ready to read the story. So I'm babysitting tonight, have a little fire going, and got the Texas game on TV. Right now it's commercial. But anyway, it's muted, Mom. All right. I remember, this is from 1939 to 1947. I remember the fire. It was one of my first memories. I was 3 years old. A crowd of relatives had gathered in the front yard and stood quietly under the tall oak trees. I saw some men splash a liquid around the base of our 2-story wood frame house. A thin man threw a torch upon it and quickly jumped back. I heard a whoosh sound and felt the heat against my cheeks as the fire devoured our home. No one tried to put it out. I held onto my mother's leg and stared into the bright orange flames, wondering what it all meant. She's 3 years old, and her house is being burnt down on purpose. Everything had happened so suddenly. The memory is a blur of sounds, people, and colors. My father had just come home from a long trip. We had the usual feast to celebrate his return. Afterward, the children were shooed upstairs so the grown-ups could drink and carry on. I was still awake when the party ended, too excited by the noise to sleep. I crept downstairs and saw my father sitting in his rocking chair. He spotted me, smiled, and stretched out his arms. I ran to him and jumped in his lap. My older sisters later described my father, Alfred Joseph DeBarbin, as a tall, handsome man with blue eyes and thick, grayish blonde hair. He was always well-dressed, usually in a 3-piece suit, accented by a dangling gold chain that led to the pocket watch he carried in his vest. He often tied a colorful cravat around his neck and was fond of knee-high boots, which he kept shiny and polished. He was born and raised in Paris, and some members of his family were said to be prominent in the French government. In the early 1900s, a large group of my ancestors from both sides came to America. And settled in Boston. My father met my mother when he was in his late 40s and she was only 16. They were opposites. She was petite, just under 5 feet tall, with pale blue eyes set off by black hair that hung past her waist when she combed it out each night. During the day, she wore it knotted at the nape of her neck in a chignon that was held in place by 2 large tortoiseshell hairpins. Both families scorned their marriage. His people didn't think Mother had the proper breeding. Her family was from Nice and believed that anyone from Paris was a scoundrel. Besides, he was much too old. Despite these misgivings, the marriage was solid. Mother had 13 children, though only 7 survived infancy. I was the last daughter and next to last child. My family was part of a splinter group that migrated from Boston to Chalmette, Louisiana, a small French enclave a few miles from New Orleans. My great-grandfather, Louis James Bellevue DeBarbin, had set off on an earlier wave of immigration when the French government sent him to Louisiana as a munitions and customs official during the colonization in the 1700s and early 1800s, prior to the Louisiana Purchase. Many of his descendants chose to settle in Chalmette and New Orleans rather than return to France, so we were among friends and relatives. My father served as county sheriff for a while and later had an interest in a cattle ranch in Houston that forced him to travel frequently. He was 75 when I sat in his lap that night, but I had no conception of age. He was energetic and quick to laugh or sing. He was proud of his French heritage and made all his children learn French before they learned English. French was the only language I knew at the time, and it was the only language my mother ever spoke. That night, as he held me on his lap, he said, My petite bee, you're going to be a beautiful woman one day and sing like a nightingale." He started to hum, after the ball was over and said, "Ma chérie, sing with me." He sang it a few times, and I tried to parrot the English lyrics. All of a sudden, he started coughing violently. He ordered me to get him some water. I ran to the kitchen, but couldn't reach the faucet. I ran back to tell him, but someone grabbed my shoulders and held me back. I peeked around their legs and saw my mother sitting on the couch with my father's head in her lap. She was hugging him and crying. My father was dead. I found out later that he had tuberculosis. As was the custom among the French immigrants, the relatives burned down our house the next day, thinking it would stop the spread of the disease. I had lost not only my father, but my home as well. The family was placed under the dominating hand of my stern maternal grandmother, Alicia Lachenier Lenot. She was a heartless old woman, permanently unhappy about being uprooted from her beloved niece. She hated America and Americans. She shrouded herself in mourning clothes, long black dresses, and black bonnets, and peered down at us through wire-rimmed glasses. She walked with a cane, which she brandished about, while condemning everyone to hell. My grandmother had never stopped hating my father, and that hatred spilled over to his children. We immediately became disposable. We had so much when my father was alive. The house was large and well furnished. We never wanted for anything. After he died, everything vanished in the fire. Anything else he had was confiscated by my grandmother, and my family became impoverished overnight. My grandmother forced my mother to work as a common maid and sent my 5-year-old sister, Mary, and me back to Boston. My younger brother and 2 sisters remained in Chalmette. I never knew why we were separated, but even at that young age, I sensed that my grandmother disliked me most of all. So this is her mother's mother, and she forced her own daughter to work as a common maid. Terrible. "Your parents both have blue eyes, but you have green eyes," she told me once. "That's a sign that you are evil." In Boston, we moved in with a widow named Nini Chaudoir, a kind woman in her 60s. No one ever explained who she was, though I recall someone saying she was the wife of one of my father's brothers. We called her Tante Nini. She lived by herself in a magnificent 3-story house that was so tall I could see the lights of the city from my bedroom window. Despite the pleasant surroundings, I was unhappy about being away from my family. When I was 5, I went on an outing with some older girls from the neighborhood. We were riding on a horse-drawn wagon in the country, making stops to gather flowers. I took off my shoes and sat in the wagon, dangling my feet over the side. The girls made me promise to sit there and not move while they ran off to play. I quickly became bored and decided to jump into the muddy water a few feet away. When I landed, I felt a sharp pain in my foot. I stepped out and discovered that my foot was bleeding. The girls ran over and pleaded with me to stop crying. They told me not to tell anyone what happened. As the months passed, the pain in my foot increased. The girls were still afraid of getting into trouble and repeated their request that I not tell anyone. I obeyed and withstood the pain. Shortly afterward, Tante Nini told me I was too serious and sad for a child and sent me back home to my mother. I was pleased, but the pain in my foot tempered my happiness. Back in Chalmette, I attended a convent school and began limping. I was soon unable to wear a shoe on that foot because it was swollen and sore. The other kids at school thought I was crippled and avoided me. How sad. With no friends, I turned my attention to schoolwork. I studied hard and won some merit awards. I learned English, but found that it was my foot, not my language, that scared the other children away. I continued to endure the pain because of my vow to my friends in Boston. I didn't want to get them in trouble. So she is already showing a great ability to keep secrets. My uncle, Geoffrey Bellevue de Barbin, arrived unexpectedly from France one day. He was a jolly man who looked a lot like my father, except his hair was darker and he sported thick, bushy sideburns. He was a doctor and asked me in French about my foot. I decided to confide in him. I told him about jumping off the wagon into the muddy water. He examined the scar and told me there was something inside that must be removed. He convinced my mother to send me back to Boston so he could operate. When he opened my foot, he found a green thorn. It had entered near my toe, and in the year since the accident, had traveled almost to the center of my foot. He said it was a miracle that I didn't lose my foot from an infection. I was elated because not only was the pain gone, but more important, I could wear a shoe. I could become just like other kids and wouldn't be shunned anymore. Free from the pain and stigma, my personality began to blossom. I soon had many friends. My mother continued working as a maid, cleaning churches and large houses, scrubbing floors, washing windows, working herself to the bone. She would come home exhausted and depressed. She never smiled anymore. I knew her opportunities were limited. Excuse me just a second while I readjust here. I knew her opportunities were limited because she couldn't speak English. My father's last words about me growing up to be a beautiful singer stuck in my mind. I wanted to be successful so I could help my mother. I practiced singing every day, learning everything from opera to popular tunes. I learned to control my voice and alter the tones. When I was 11, the nuns at the convent asked me to sing at a large, beautiful church, St. Anthony of Padua. I sang high soprano solos in Latin at Mass. One day, the house mother told me that my grandmother had come to see them. They said I would be moving away soon. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, finally settling in somewhere and had to leave again. When I got home, there was a party going on. The house was full of strangers, mostly men. A well-dressed woman introduced herself and told me to call her Aunt Victoria. After dinner, I was asked to sing. That was routine at our parties, and I loved performing. Hold on just a second. I'm going to pause this. Okay, I turned the TV off because it was making light on the page, and I thought it was my phone light, but it was a TV. If anyone's reading along, I didn't want it to be distracting. Okay, so let's start back over right here. When I got home, there was a party going on. The house was full of strangers, mostly men. A well-dressed woman introduced herself and told me to call her Aunt Victoria. After dinner, I was asked to sing. That was routine at our parties, and I loved performing. I had recently learned the song Mother Macrae and dedicated it to my mother. I could see the tears in her eyes as I sang. She told me later that the strangers were friends of my grandmother and had come to visit because of me. They were interested in helping me study music. They would furnish us with a nice home and things wouldn't be as hard anymore. My mother could give up her terrible job. I was thrilled. I was only 11 and already my singing had helped. A few days later, my mother went off to live in a wonderful new home in Monroe, Louisiana. I was put in the care of Aunt Victoria. She was about 40 and tall with short, curly black hair. She was obviously wealthy because she had a closet full of fur coats and adorned herself with diamond rings, earrings, and necklaces. She began dressing me in her image. I loved the new clothes and acted out fantasies in the mirror, playing the part of a sophisticated lady out in the town. My hair was long and black like my mother's, and I experimented with different styles. Aunt Victoria caught me primping one day and said, "Lucy, you're a very pretty girl, and your breasts are very large. You look older than you really are. Some young men might be interested in you. Don't tell anyone how young you really are." I didn't like that. I was self-conscious about my breasts. I wanted to look like my friends. Their bosoms were flatter, and they could wear smock dresses. I remember smock dresses. They look good when you're flat up there. I was always trying to hide my figure under baggy clothes. 2 weeks later, Aunt Victoria said that my grandmother was coming to discuss my future. She arrived promptly and ordered me to cooperate with the family's wishes. She said a green-eyed girl like me would go wayward if she didn't get married. I couldn't believe what she was saying. Married? I was just 11. I had never even had a boyfriend. I don't know anyone to get married to, I said. I don't want to get married. I have to study. She told me I didn't have to worry about finding a husband. It was all arranged. There was a nice man who thought I was pretty and had agreed to marry me. I would be taken to him in Jackson, Mississippi. No, I will not do this, I said. My mother will never agree to this. My grandmother told me that if I didn't do as I was told, my mother would be thrown out of the new home and forced to work as a maid again. Do you want to see your mother work herself to death? She admonished. I was then instructed to tell my mother that getting married was my idea, and I would be happy. A week passed. I thought it had all been a horrible dream. Then Aunt Victoria and my grandmother came and told me to pack my things. They put me in a big black car and drove me to Mississippi. I was introduced to a man I remembered having seen at my house when I sang. He was tall, about 6 feet, thin, and had a ruddy complexion and dark reddish hair streaked with gray. He was at least 45 or older and smelled of alcohol. He was to be my husband. I had never been kissed, and now I was to be the wife of a 45-year-old man. I was taken to a wide gray house with tall ceilings and dusty rugs. The man's sister came to stay with me and prepare me for the wedding. She looked like the house, drab and gray. She kept asking, "What's wrong with you?" Because I was pale and frightened. I was so afraid that I kept throwing up in the bathroom. A second woman, equally unpleasant, came in and handed me a dismal skirt, blouse, and jacket to wear as my wedding gown. I was told that the man didn't want anything special so as not to attract attention. I knew it was because of my age. The women left me alone to dress. I stared in the mirror, trying to understand why all this was happening. I kept telling myself that God had a reason for everything. I thought of running away, but where could I go? I was in a strange city, and even if I did escape, they would force my mother to go back to work. I tried to stay strong. I brushed away the tears so no one would see them. I was taken outside and put in a car between the man and his sister. No one said anything. I remember it was raining and dreary. I was brought before a man dressed in black, a justice of the peace. He mumbled some words without smiling and then ordered me to say, "I do." I did as I was told, with a strange man beside me and 2 strangers standing behind me. I was married. We were driven back to the house. The women left. I was alone with the man. That night, I tried to stall as long as I could to keep him away. I knew something awful was going to happen, but I didn't know what. No one had told me anything. He kept approaching me and putting his hands on me. I pushed him away. I ran upstairs and hid in a closet. I got on my knees and begged God to let me wake up from this horrible nightmare. Instead, I heard a loud banging on the door. The voice was angry and cold. "I know you're in there. I'm tired of waiting. You come on out right now." I crawled deeper into the back of the closet. He started banging harder and shouting louder. He began throwing his body against the door. I was terrified and began screaming. The door burst open. He reached in, dragged me out, and threw me on the bed. He ripped off my clothes until I was completely naked. I was so ashamed. I tried to cover up, but he spread apart my arms, then took my body. I'll never forget the pain. Okay, so that was Lucy. And now the author is going to talk a little bit about some of his research and just explain some things. To this day, Lucy doesn't realize or has refused to accept the fact that she was sold like a slave to the highest bidder. The party at her house was actually a discreet auction with Lucy as the prized property. Aunt Victoria was probably the wife of the local marriage broker or possibly a marriage broker herself. Lucy's singing performance was geared toward titillating the buyers and opening their wallets. The winner of this auction was Richard Dixie W.D. Ware, an underachiever whose stake came from a family aviation business and some minor real estate transactions. The house in Monroe that Ware offered Lucy's family may have been only part of the price, or the house in Monroe where her mother ended up living. The house in Monroe that Ware offered Lucy's family may have been only part of the price he paid for a beautiful 11-year-old thoroughbred. To some, this account may read as though it took place in another century. Actually, because this was in 1939 or something like that. To some, this account may read as though it took place in another century. 47. Actually, such marriages were not uncommon in 1947. So she was 11 in 1947. The French have a tradition of arranged marriages and refer to them as mariage de convenience. Mariage de convenience. I'm trying to say that in French. A 1961 study by Wesley D. Camp, Ph.D., determined that the French had the highest frequency of marriages in the younger ages of all European countries. In America, the 1980 census reported that among all married women, 3,284,682 were married at age 15 or below. That's huge. Over 3 million were age 15 or below in the 1980 census. Broken down yearly, the National Center for Health Statistics reports that in 1982, the most recent year it surveyed, again, this book was written in 1987, so the most recent year it was surveyed in 1982, there were 9,214 girls in America who married at age 15 or below, including 67 at age 12, 198 at age 13, and 1,498 at 14. No state allows legal marriages below age 12, so there are no statistics for younger ages. These figures don't account for people who lie about their age on their marriage license, nor do they include 8 states that failed to report age breakdowns in their figures. It is also significant that Lucy was brought to Mississippi to be married. In 1947, the minimum legal age a girl could marry with parental consent in Louisiana was 16. In Mississippi, the minimum age was 12. At the publication of this book in 1987, Mississippi had raised the age to 15, 1 year higher than Alabama and New York. If one is inclined to believe that we've progressed beyond such archaic practices, consider the turnaround of the state of New Hampshire. In 1925, the minimum age for girls in this forward-thinking state was 18, the highest minimum in the United States, and the age social reformers were pushing for as a national law. By 1987, the minimum age a girl could marry with parental consent in New Hampshire had plunged to 13. Crazy. Also, down here, Richard Ware, it's a little star. Richard Ware, known as Dixie W.D. Ware, and Lucy DeBarban should not be confused with Richard Ware and his late wife, Dixie Ware, of Monroe, Louisiana. Ms. Dixie Ware was a television personality on station KNOE in Monroe, where Lucy later worked. They are not related. Okay, so that's the first chapter. And next we'll read 1947 to 53. So she's 11, and we will start up with that next time. So basically, Lucy was 3 when her dad died in 1939. And her house was burned down because he had tuberculosis, and then she was put under the care, her family was put under the care of her grandmother on her mother's side, who forced her mother to work as a maid, cleaning churches and houses. And she and her sister Mary were sent to Boston to live with family up there. And she got a splinter in her foot that she had in there for a year. And so her foot was swollen, probably her ankle and leg a little bit. And she couldn't wear a shoe, and other children were afraid of her, which makes sense because she was 5 years old. And then her uncle, who was a doctor, after a year, did surgery and took it out. And then she was a happy 5-year-old. And for the next 6 years, she was doing pretty good, I guess. They moved her back to live with her mother. And then her grandmother came and sold her off to a 45-year-old man when she was 11. And she is now married to him. And had a terrifying first night of the wedding. All right. So there we go. All right. I will talk with you guys next time.